On August 6, 1945, Tsutomu Yamaguchi saw a light brighter than anything he had ever witnessed. He described it as the lightning of a huge magnesium flare. Then the world went black. He had just survived the most powerful weapon ever used in warfare. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 3 days later, bandaged and burned, he sat in an office in Nagasaki, trying to explain to his boss what had happened. His supervisor called him crazy. No single bomb, he said, could destroy an entire city. Then, mid-sentence, the room filled with blinding white light again. Yamaguchi fell to the floor as the windows shattered around him. When he looked up, he saw another mushroom cloud rising into the sky. "I thought the mushroom cloud had followed me from Hiroshima," he later said. Tsutomu Yamaguchi had just survived his second atomic bomb in 3 days. He remains the only person officially recognized by the Japanese government as having been present at ground zero of both nuclear attacks. This is his story. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was born on March 16, 1916, in the port city of Nagasaki, Japan. He grew up during a period of rapid industrialization when Japan was transforming itself into a modern military power. As a young man, Yamaguchi showed a talent for technical work. He studied engineering and joined Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in the 1930s, working as a draftsman designing oil tankers at their Nagasaki shipyard. It was steady, important work, the kind of job that would define his life. But Yamaguchi was not a war enthusiast. Unlike many of his countrymen caught up in imperial fervor, he privately questioned Japan's military ambitions. As the war dragged on and resources grew scarce, he became increasingly despondent. At his lowest point, he even considered killing his wife, Hisako, and their infant son, Katsutoshi, with sleeping pills if Japan lost the war, rather than face the shame and uncertainty of defeat. It's a dark detail, but it reveals how desperate things had become by 1945. The Japan that Yamaguchi knew was crumbling. American bombers had already reduced more than 60 Japanese cities to ashes with conventional firebombing. The end felt inevitable, but no one knew what form it would take. In the summer of 1945, Yamaguchi's employer sent him on a 3-month business trip to Hiroshima. Along with 2 colleagues, Akira Iwanaga and Kuniyoshi Sato, he was to finalize designs for a new oil tanker. August 6th was supposed to be his last day in the city. He had completed his work and was looking forward to returning home to his wife and infant son. He had no way of knowing that he was about to witness the dawn of a new and terrible age. To understand what Yamaguchi survived, we need to understand what was about to happen to Hiroshima. At 2:45 in the morning on August 6, 1945, a modified B-29 superfortress named the Enola Gay lifted off from Tinian Island in the Pacific. The plane was named after the pilot's mother. Colonel Paul Tibbets had asked a maintenance worker to paint the name on the nose shortly before takeoff. In its bomb bay sat a weapon codenamed Little Boy, a uranium gun-type atomic bomb weighing nearly 10,000 pounds. No one, not even the scientists who designed it, fully understood what they had created. The flight to Japan took about 6 hours. At 7:15 a.m., the weaponeer Captain William Parsons armed the bomb. At 8:09 a.m., the bombardier Tom Ferriby sighted the city of Hiroshima through a break in the clouds. He aimed for the T-shaped Aioi Bridge in the center of the city. At 8:15 a.m., Little Boy was released from 31,000 feet. The bomb fell for 43 seconds before detonating at approximately 1,900 feet above the city. Nuclear fission began in less than 1/10 millionth of a second. The fireball reached temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun. The blast wave traveled at nearly 1,000 miles per hour. Buildings were vaporized. Human beings were turned to shadows, burned into stone. Within seconds, more than 2/3 of Hiroshima's structures were destroyed. At least 80,000 people died instantly. Tens of thousands more would perish in the weeks and months that followed from burns, radiation sickness, and injuries. Tsutomu Yamaguchi was walking toward the Mitsubishi shipyard that morning when it happened. He had realized he forgot his hanko, a personal seal used as identification in Japan, and had turned back to retrieve it. He was approximately 3 kilometers from ground zero. Yamaguchi looked up and saw the B-29 bomber overhead. He noticed 2 small parachutes falling from the aircraft, instruments attached to measure the blast. Then the sky erupted. There was a great flash in the sky, and I was blown over, he later recalled. Drawing on his air raid training, Yamaguchi had just enough time to dive into an irrigation ditch. He flung his hands over his head, locked his fingers over his eyes, and jammed his thumbs into his ears. The explosion ruptured his eardrums. It temporarily blinded him. It burned the left side of his face and body to a blackened crisp. When he regained consciousness, the morning sun was blotted out by dust and ash. The mushroom cloud rose above the city. Like a tornado, he said, although it didn't move, but it rose and spread out horizontally at the top. There was prismatic light, which was changing in a complicated rhythm, like the patterns of a kaleidoscope. Yamaguchi crawled out of the ditch and staggered through what remained of Hiroshima. What he saw defied comprehension. The rivers of Hiroshima, which had once been beautiful, were now choked with floating corpses. Swimming pools and ponds were filled with bodies. People had desperately sought water as they burned. Streetcars stood frozen in the streets, their passengers dead, inside, piled on top of one another, stripped of their clothes by the blast. The wounded wandered through the ruins like ghosts. Their clothes had been ripped to shreds. Their skin hung from their bodies in strips. Their hair stood on end. They moved in silence. No one screamed. No one cried out. It was, survivors said, too much like hell for anyone to make a sound. Yamaguchi searched for his colleagues and eventually found both Iwanaga and Sato alive. The 3 men spent the night in an air raid shelter, surrounded by the moans of the dying and the glow of fires that would burn for days. The next morning, August 7th, Yamaguchi made a decision that seems almost incomprehensible. He was going home. Despite his burns, his ruptured eardrums, and the radiation coursing through his body, he made his way to the train station. The journey took him through a landscape of absolute devastation. At one river crossing, the bridges had been destroyed, and Yamaguchi was forced to swim through a layer of floating dead bodies. When he finally reached the station, he boarded a train full of burned and bewildered survivors. Many were bandaged, some were dying. One man on the train, Yamaguchi later learned, was carrying a cloth-wrapped bundle on his lap. When asked what it was, the man replied, "I married a month ago, but my wife died yesterday. I want to take her home to her parents." Beneath the cloth was his bride's severed head. This was the train to Nagasaki. Yamaguchi arrived in Nagasaki on the evening of August 8th. He was so badly burned that when he reached the hospital, the doctor who treated him, a former school classmate, didn't recognize him. Neither did his family. His wife Hisako and infant son Katsutoshi were alive, but they were shocked by his condition. Yamaguchi's face was swollen, blackened, and covered in burns. His arms were wrapped in makeshift bandages. He had lost hearing in his left ear, but he was alive. And in 1945, that was enough. While Yamaguchi rested at home, the world was changing. 16 hours after the Hiroshima explosion, President Harry Truman gave a speech, revealing the existence of the atomic bomb for the first time. "It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe," Truman announced. "The force from which the sun draws its power has been loosed against those who brought war to the Far East." He warned Japan that if it did not surrender, it could expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. Japan's military leaders debated what to do. Some wanted to fight on. Others recognized that the situation was hopeless. Meanwhile, on Tinian Island, American personnel were already preparing a second bomb. This one was different. While Little Boy had been a uranium bomb, the second weapon, codenamed Fat Man, used plutonium and a more complex implosion design. It was more powerful than the first bomb. The original target was the city of Kokura, where Japan operated a major ordnance factory. Nagasaki was the secondary target. On the morning of August 9th, the B-29 Boxcar took off carrying Fat Man. The pilot was Major Charles Sweeney. The bomb was already armed. The mission was plagued with problems from the start. A fuel pump had failed, leaving thousands of gallons of fuel inaccessible. The crew couldn't rendezvous with their support aircraft, and when they arrived over Kokura, the city was obscured by clouds and smoke from a nearby firebombing raid. After 3 failed bombing runs, and with Japanese fighters beginning to scramble, Sweeney made the decision to divert to the secondary target, Nagasaki. Despite his injuries, Tsutomu Yamaguchi reported for work at Mitsubishi's Nagasaki office on the morning of August 9th. It might seem incredible that a man who had just survived an atomic bomb would go to work 2 days later, but this was wartime Japan. Duty came before everything else, and perhaps, like many survivors, Yamaguchi was still in shock, still trying to process what he had witnessed. That morning, he was called into his supervisor's office to give a report on what had happened in Hiroshima. At approximately 11 a.m., Yamaguchi stood before his boss, still wrapped in bandages, and began describing the destruction he had seen. He explained how a single bomb had leveled an entire city, how the flash had come first, then the blast, how the mushroom cloud had risen into the sky. His supervisor was incredulous. "You're crazy," he said. No single bomb could do what Yamaguchi was describing. At that exact moment, at 11:02 a.m., the sky outside the window lit up with a blinding white light. Fat Man had detonated over Nagasaki. The bomb exploded approximately 1,650 feet above the Urakami Valley, about 3 kilometers from where Yamaguchi was standing. It missed its intended target by nearly 2 miles, but it didn't matter. The yield was approximately 21 kilotons, nearly 40% more powerful than Little Boy. At least 40,000 people died instantly. By the end of the year, the death toll would reach 70,000 or more. The hills surrounding the Urakami Valley actually contained some of the blast, protecting parts of the city. But the industrial district, including Mitsubishi's shipyard, was devastated. Yamaguchi fell to the floor as the shockwave hit. The windows of the office shattered, sending glass flying through the room. The building shook. Outside, the city was being erased. But here, fate intervened. The reinforced stairwell and the hills surrounding the office building created what one author called a shock cocoon, a pocket of relative protection. Yamaguchi survived, and because he had just been describing the Hiroshima blast to his colleagues, they had instinctively taken cover the moment the flash appeared. His warning, his crazy, unbelievable story, may have saved their lives. Yamaguchi struggled out of the ruined building and ran home, terrified for his family. He found his wife, Hisako, alive. She had been out looking for burn ointment for her husband when the bomb fell. She and baby Katsutoshi had taken shelter in a tunnel. In a bitter irony, Yamaguchi's injuries from Hiroshima had saved his family. If he hadn't been hurt, his wife wouldn't have been out searching for medicine. She would have been at home, closer to the blast. The family reunited in the ruins of Nagasaki. Yamaguchi had now survived 2 atomic bombs in 3 days. He had been approximately 3 kilometers from ground zero both times. He had witnessed the only 2 nuclear weapons ever used in warfare. He was 29 years old. In the days following the Nagasaki bombing, Yamaguchi's body began to betray him. The double dose of radiation took its toll. His hair fell out. The wounds on his arms turned gangrenous. He developed a high fever and couldn't stop vomiting. For over a week, he suffered from radiation sickness that should have killed him, but Yamaguchi survived. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender. The war was over. Yamaguchi spent months recovering from his injuries. Eventually, he returned to work. First as a translator for the American occupation forces, then as a school teacher, and finally back at Mitsubishi, where he continued designing oil tankers. He and Hisako went on to have 2 more children, daughters born in the early 1950s. Yamaguchi tried to put the past behind him and live a normal life. In 1957, the Japanese government began officially recognizing atomic bomb survivors as hibakusha, meaning explosion-affected people. Yamaguchi was certified, but his documentation only listed the Nagasaki bombing. For decades, no one knew that he had also been at Hiroshima. Yamaguchi was content with this. He was relatively healthy compared to many survivors. Speaking out felt unfair to those who were suffering more visibly, but the bombs never fully left him. He lost hearing permanently in his left ear. He developed cataracts. His daughter recalls that for the first 12 years of her life, her father was constantly wrapped in bandages as his wounds slowly healed. His wife Hisako suffered too. She had been caught in the black rain that fell after the Nagasaki explosion, radioactive precipitation that contaminated everyone it touched. She battled health problems her entire life. All 3 of their children reported suffering from health issues they attributed to their parents' radiation exposure. For most of his life, Yamaguchi stayed silent about his experiences. The hibakusha faced discrimination in Japan. People feared that radiation sickness was contagious, that survivors and their children were somehow tainted. Marriage prospects were ruined. Jobs were denied. But as Yamaguchi grew older, something changed. In 1981, he listened to Pope John Paul II speak in Hiroshima about war being the work of man. The words moved him. He began to feel that his survival carried a responsibility, a duty to speak. His son Katsutoshi died of cancer in 2005 at the age of 59. His wife Hisako died of kidney and liver cancer in 2008. The losses broke something open in Yamaguchi. In January 2009, at the age of 93, he applied to have his status updated to double hibakusha, a survivor of both bombings. The Japanese government reviewed his case and in March 2009 officially recognized him as the only person to have survived both atomic attacks. My double radiation exposure is now an official government record, Yamaguchi said. It can tell the younger generation the horrifying history of the atomic bombings even after I die. In his final years, Tsutomu Yamaguchi became a voice for nuclear disarmament. He had spent decades in silence. Now he spoke everywhere, to journalists, to documentarians, to the United Nations. In 2006, at the age of 90, he traveled to New York City, the first and last time he ever left Japan, to speak at the United Nations about his experiences. Having experienced atomic bombings twice and survived, it is my destiny to talk about it, he said. He pleaded for the abolition of nuclear weapons. He described what he had seen in language that was simple and devastating. The reason that I hate the atomic bomb, he told an interviewer, is because of what it does to the dignity of human beings. He wrote poetry to process his memories. He wrote a memoir called Ikasareteru Inochi, which translates to A Life Well Lived or A Life Spared. He appeared in documentaries and gave countless interviews. When filmmaker James Cameron and author Charles Pellegrino visited him in the hospital in late 2009, Yamaguchi spoke about the possibility of making a film about nuclear weapons. I think it's Cameron's and Pellegrino's destiny to make a film about nuclear weapons, he said. Tsutomu Yamaguchi died on January 4, 2010, in Nagasaki. He was 93 years old. The cause of death was stomach cancer, possibly related to his radiation exposure, though we'll never know for certain. He had outlived his wife by 2 years and his son by 5. Tsutomu Yamaguchi's story raises questions that have no easy answers. Was he lucky? He survived 2 atomic bombs when more than 200,000 people died. He lived to 93. He raised a family. He found purpose in his final years. Or was he unlucky? He witnessed horrors that haunted him for the rest of his life. He carried radiation in his body. He watched his wife and son die of cancer. He suffered in ways that most of us cannot imagine. Perhaps both are true. What's certain is that Yamaguchi chose to transform his suffering into something meaningful. He could have remained silent forever. Instead, he spent his final years warning the world about what he had seen. He wasn't the only double survivor. Researchers estimate that at least 160 people were affected by both bombings, but many died shortly afterward or never came forward. Yamaguchi remains the only one officially recognized, the only documented witness to both nuclear attacks. His testimony matters because the memories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are fading. The youngest survivors are now in their 80s. Soon, there will be no one left who experienced the atomic age firsthand. Yamaguchi understood this. That's why he spoke. I can't understand why the world cannot understand the agony of the nuclear bombs, he said near the end of his life. How can they keep developing these weapons? It's a question we still haven't answered. Today, 9 countries possess nuclear weapons. The combined global arsenal is estimated at over 12,000 warheads. A single modern thermonuclear weapon is hundreds of times more powerful than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Tsutomu Yamaguchi survived the only 2 atomic bombs ever used in war. He spent his final years hoping there would never be a third. Whether the world listens is up to us. If you want to learn more about incredible survival stories from World War II, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss our next video. And if this story moved you, Leave a comment below. What would you have done in Yamaguchi's situation? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have spoken out?